Okay, hi everyone. My name is Anna. Thank you so much for joining tonight's webinar for the NYC Women's Fund for Media, Music, and Theater. Today's webinar is going over the theater category. And so just before we get started, again, my name is Anna. I'm a program officer with New York Foundation for the Arts, helping to manage the NYC Women's Fund. I'm joined today by my colleague, Alicia Sejus, who is another program officer at New York Foundation for the Arts. Today's webinar is going over the theater category, and we're also going to leave ample time at the end for question and answer. And so to do so, if you have a question at any time during the session, you can direct your questions to the Q&A box on Zoom. So it'll be next to the chat function, but it's a Q&A box. That's where you can put any questions that you may have about your application or about the fund in general. And we'll do our best to answer them. If we don't get to your question, though, you can always send us an email. But we'll get started. So again, this is the NYC Women's Fund for Media, Music, and Theater. So the NYC Women's Fund applications opened on July 26th at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Applications will close Tuesday, November 1st at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And applicants will be notified of their status by March of 2023. And all application forms are available now at nyfa.org/NYC Women's Fund. So tonight's presentation will go over the theater category, some eligibility criteria, the application form, giving an overview, as well as talking about the work samples and the budget. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll leave ample time for Q&A. So put your questions in the Q&A box on Zoom. So jumping right into the presentation, talking about the theater category, some eligible project types. Again, the NYC Women's Fund is a project-based grant. The fund will provide production grants for theater. Only original productions that have not been staged before are eligible. Workshops or developmental readings are fine and do not affect eligibility. Operas, musicals, devised or company-created pieces are also eligible. However, purely dance performance or choreography projects are not eligible. Theater projects that do feature dance elements, however, are eligible. In addition to being made by, for, or about all who identify as women, projects are eligible if they feature any of the following. A strong female-identified perspective. B, a female-identified writer, director, or protagonists. The applicant must reside in any of the 5 boroughs of New York City. And theater companies may be incorporated elsewhere, but must have a New York-based business address. And applicants do not need to be US citizens, but must be able to provide a W-9 with a social security number or individual taxpayer identification number or EIN after selection. As I mentioned, the project must be an original play or book of a musical with dialogue, lyrics, and music that has not been produced previously in any capacity. Projects must be able to project a professional staging, including paid cast and crew, of the developed work by March 31st of 2024 for a minimum of 5 performances in New York City. Projects must be rehearsed and performed in New York City, and productions can be either presented to an in-person live audience or online live audience or a hybrid of both. Applicants can be theater companies, commercial or not-for-profit producers, or playwrights planning to self-produce. And funds must be used to complete the project outlined in the application form. Funds may be allocated as the applicant needs to complete the project. However, funds cannot be used to purchase capital goods or equipment. So moving on to the application form, the applicant or if different, the recipient of funds must be a current resident of NYC. Applicants will be asked to provide a New York City-based residential address, contact information such as phone and email, names and contact information for directors, writers, producers, key personnel. And as a reminder, all applications are online and we use the platform Submittable. So next in the application form, you'll be asked for some project information. And as a reminder, these are project-based grants. For your project, you will be asked to provide the project name and running time. Project synopsis. This will be an overview of themes and overall storyline. How your project represents voices, experiences, and perspectives of all who identify as women. Production schedules and plans to complete by March of 2024. And this can include a narrative or a calendar of events or key milestones. And plans for promotion and distribution. So in this, please tell us any plans that you have for the play to be fully produced by March 31st of 2024. Include any commitments from producers, other artists, or venues. If the applicant is a theater company, confirm dates for the production to appear in your season and any associated artists. And also indicate whether your project will be produced online, in person, or a hybrid of both. So moving on to some more project information, you'll also be asked to provide a list of potential venues and a letter of agreement or intent from potential venue partners, if available. For independent producers or playwrights planning to self-produce, it is not required to secure a venue prior to applying. We do want to see that you've thought about it though. And please upload brief biographies of the applicant, performers, producer, and any other key participating artists. Please combine all biographies into one PDF document, no larger than 10 megabytes. Each individual biography should not exceed 1 page. And now to talk about the work samples. So theater work samples, applicants should include a up to 15 page excerpt of the script to be produced. For musicals, operas, or other productions in which music plays a critical role, there is the option to upload a 10-minute music sample. For devised or company-created pieces, a 15-page sample of the previous project and complete description of prompts or concepts for new work to be created can be submitted in place of a standard script excerpt. Okay, so that's about the work samples. Moving on to the kind of budget-related questions. You'll see a question that asks, how do you plan to use the NYC Women's Fund to complete your project? So this is about the fund allocation. For this question, please include an itemized list for the requested fund allocation on your project. This list should account for the full spend of the requested NYC Women's Fund award amount. Please specify also the dollar amount of each expense item. And please note, applications that do not specify how the NYC Women's Fund will be spent are ineligible. This is just because we don't have enough information about your project. The dollar amounts of each item should equal your total NYC Women's Fund request. So for example, if I'm requesting 20,000, the dollar amounts of each item should equal that dollar amount requested, so the 20,000. No more than 20% of the award can be used for marketing and distribution, so keep that in mind. And as a general rule, the NYC Women's Fund is meant to support artist fees first and foremost, but it is not appropriate for physical items or any equipment purchases. However, equipment rentals are acceptable. So here's an example of that previous question. So how do you plan to use the NYC Women's Fund to complete your project? For example, if I'm requesting $20,000 to complete my project, I would then list out each item, and it doesn't have to be too specific, but for example, artist fees, 13,000, equipment rental, 5,000, marketing and distribution, 2,000. So this is just an example, very broad, but you can see that there are items. So for example, artist fees, equipment rental, marketing and distribution, those are the items. You can see next to them the dollar amount that I plan to spend on each item. So 13,000, 5,000, 2,000. And at the bottom, you can see that the total of 20,000 is the total ask of the grant. And keeping in mind too, marketing and distribution should be under 20%. So now moving on to the actual budget, the budget table, you will be asked to complete a budget showing the overall expenses and income and any applicable notes for your proposed project. So again, this is the overall total project expenses and income. You may choose between filling out a provided budget template in Submittable, which is the platform we use to accept applications, or you may upload your own budget. And just a note, if you do plan to upload your own budget, I would just take a look at the budget template in Submittable to get a sense for the kind of information that we're looking for. But it's completely acceptable to upload your own budget. Please note, applicants do not need to complete all budget lines. Artist fees should include all related expenses, such as union fees. And please add unlisted budget line items under other for each category. And you can explain these expenses in the budget notes section. Subtotals and project totals will update automatically in the template. And if you upload your own budget, it's helpful for us to be able to see the subtotals and the project totals as well. So this is an example of the budget table in Submittable. So if you do choose to use the budget table provided, this is what you'll look at. So in the first column on the left, you'll see description, and you'll see line items such as playwright, producer, director, stage manager. And noting that you don't need to fill out each of these, but do keep in mind that this should represent the total expense for your full project. So not just the spend of the NYC Women's Fund, but the total project. So those are the line items for which you can choose from, and noting that each category has a other section. So for this other artistic, those would be other artist fees that are not included in this list. To the right of that column, you'll see total expense. That's where you'll put the dollar amount for the total expense of your full project. So for example, for playwright, the total amount of money that you plan to spend on your playwriter. And to the right of that column, you'll see the budget notes section. This is an optional section where you can provide additional information if you feel that it's necessary. For example, if you have another artist that's not listed in this list, and you put them under other, and you put the dollar amount, it's helpful for us to see who that person is. So that would be a chance for you to explain a little more context in the budget notes section, but that's optional for the line items. Here you'll also see the income table. So that was the expense table. This is the income table. To the first column on the right, you'll see similarly the line items. So this is separated into like contributed income, earned income, and in-kind. In-kind being like donated expenses. But you can see like federal funding, state funding. These are the line items. To the right of that, you can put the total dollar amount that you plan for your whole project to receive as income. And to the right of that is the budget notes section. So for example, if you're receiving federal funding from a couple different sources, you can put the full dollar amount of your federal funding in the amount column. And to the right of that in the budget notes, you can put the, if you choose to, it's optional, like specific funders. So if you're receiving foundation grants from 3 foundations, you can list out the foundation names there. And you can also, in the budget notes for the income table, indicate whether the income is projected, pending, or secured. And that's just helpful to get a sense for how much money is coming in, but you can feel free to make that note there. So that essentially concludes the application form. The end of the application will ask all grant applicants to complete a demographic questionnaire. These answers are not part of the application. Your responses will remain anonymous and they will not be linked to your identity. And a note on assistance in applying, NYFA is committed to supporting artists from every background and at all stages in their creative careers. We strongly encourage artists of color, LGBTQ+ artists, and artists with disabilities to apply. To request an accommodation or if you need assistance in applying online, please email NYC Women's Fund at NYFA.org. And we ask that requests for accommodation be made as soon as possible and no later than Monday, October 18th. This is just to allow adequate time for staff to support you in submitting an application in before the deadline. And before you begin your application, all application questions, frequently asked questions, and guidelines can be downloaded from NYFA's website. And I do recommend that everybody take a look at the FAQs on the website as well. You can find and download the PDF guidelines specific to the theater category on the main landing page of the grant, or email NYC Women's Fund at NYFA.org, and you can request a copy. So that concludes the presentation, and I did forget to talk a little bit about the fund at the top, so I'll just say that now. The NYC Women's Fund for Media, Music, and Theater provides grants to encourage and support the creation of digital, film, music, television, and live or online theater content that reflects the voices and perspectives of all who identify as women. The Women's Fund is administered by the New York Foundation for the Arts, or NYFA, in partnership with the City of New York Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, or MOME, and this is part of a groundbreaking series of initiatives to address the underrepresentation of women in film, music, television, and theater. And this is the 4th cycle of the fund. And yeah, so thank you so much for being part of the presentation. And at this point, we will open it up for Q&A. So I see we have several questions in the Q&A box. You can also visit www.nyfa.org/NYC Women's Fund. That's the main landing page of the grant. There you'll be also able to access the frequently asked questions. And if you still have questions, you can email us at nycwomensfund@nyfa.org. Okay, so to start off the question and answer, I have a few eligibility questions. If a theater project is currently on tour, but has not made a New York appearance and is scheduled to within the timing of the grant, can you apply? Or does it need to be a world premiere in New York City? Yes, it does need to be a world premiere in New York City. So that's sort of part of the like saying that the project can't have been produced previously. If it has been produced at any time in the past and it wasn't a developmental reading or a workshop, it would not unfortunately be eligible for this particular project. The project does need to have its world premiere in New York City. Is the grant also for people living all across the state? It can be so long as you're working with a theater company or a producer or something like that who does have an NYC address. And so, as I mentioned, the NYC Women's Fund is in partnership with the City of New York Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. That means that this is a New York City-based grant. And so while not every person on the team needs to be a New York City resident, the applicant should have a New York City residential address, and or the theater company that you're working with should have an New York City-based business address. If the show gets any opportunity to be staged before March of 2023, does the applicant need to turn that offer down? This is completely up to you. I know it's tricky. But these grants are competitive, so it's difficult for me to advise on what to do. That's sort of your producing team would need to make that call. But noting that if it is staged before March of 2023, because these are production grants, we would not be able to consider that project as being a world premiere in New York City, like with this grant. So it would not be eligible if it is staged beforehand, but if you get the opportunity to do so and you have an application pending with the NYC Women's Fund, that would be up to your team. Could our nonprofit theater organization apply to both the NYC Women's Fund and the Women's Fund for Media? So this is an important question. The NYC Women's Fund has several different categories. If you are applying as an organization or even as a key collaborator on any project, you are only eligible to apply with one application to one category. So for example, if I'm a playwright and I'm applying for the NYC Women's Fund in theater, I would not also be able to apply as a director of a short film, for example. If we do see that there are multiple applications, we will ask you to kindly withdraw one. This is just to remain fair to our community of artists who are all interested in this program, and just give everybody an even playing field. When you say you must have plans to have the play fully produced by March of 2024, does that include having a workshop or a stage reading using the funds? Not necessarily. The project should be staged by March of 2024. So whether you do a workshop or not is up to your team. But the play should have its 5 New York City performances and its world premiere by March of 2024, which is the deadline for this grant. Our show is about a female songwriter, so there are songs in the show that she wrote about her life. Most were already recorded. Should we not apply for this grant? If there's songs that have been recorded and this is a play or a theater project, that would be okay. It would not, though, be applicable if you were then to also apply for the music category because it's multiple categories, and because the music category has its own set of guidelines. Some general questions. Does a stage set, risers, blocks, doors count as equipment? Yes, it does. Yeah, so that would count as equipment if you were to buy those items. I'm a playwright seeking to self-produce, though I have a commitment from a producer to co-produce this with me. Do I need a letter of intent from this producer? It would be advantageous to get a letter of intent, but it's up to you. It's not necessary. What if it's a one-woman project at the moment and can't provide names of directors besides oneself? That's okay. Yeah, there's not like a specification that you need to have the full team in place. You should have like an idea of maybe some people that you may work with, but not necessary. If planning to self-produce, will not having other artists secured hurt my application? This is a question difficult to answer just because it's up to the review panel. We do have a unique review panel every year. So these kind of questions about what would be more competitive, it's really up to the panel's discretion. How frequently is this particular grant made available? This is the fourth cycle of the grant. We do not have a fifth cycle necessarily announced, but we would hope to offer this grant again next year. Does a play with music qualify? Yes. Is there a template for the budget? Yes, that's in Submittable. So if you log into Submittable and access the application, you should see a budget template there. Can you clarify what you mean by physical items cannot? So physical items cannot be purchased with this grant. Artist fees are eligible. It's kind of what the grant is for, is artist fees, not so much purchasing equipment. You can rent equipment. So if there's any equipment that you're planning to rent, that's eligible. And rehearsal space, like rentals for rehearsal space, food, travel, that's all eligible. So it would just be like physical equipment that will be there after the show, that's not eligible. Can one of the itemized costs be compensation for the time of the applicant? For example, the hours of research writing the playwright will need to complete the project. That's up to the applicant. Yeah, if you feel that you would like to put your time in as an artist fee, I think that it would be okay. I saw that somebody raised their hand. If you could, because this is a webinar, if you could just direct your question to the Q&A box, we'll do our best to get through them. I see there's actually a lot of questions coming in. But yeah, just please put your question in the Q&A box, and if it doesn't get answered, you can email us. Can one of the itemized costs be, oh, sorry. Can I add expenses for travel? Yes. Can income include hoped for items? Yes, you would want to list those as like projected. That means that you're projecting to get it, but nothing has been submitted and nothing has been confirmed. Should the asked amount from the NYC Women's Fund be included in the budget? Yes, you can put that in the income sheet, and you can put that as pending since you're submitting an application. Does it have to be a single, oh, so this is about work samples. Does it have to be a single project, or can we apply as a theater company run by women who will produce multiple female-led pieces? This should be a single project. These are project-based grants, not like individual or company-based grants. So if you are a theater company with multiple potential projects, we just kindly ask you to select one to apply for this fund. I'm a production company. Can I submit for a season of shows? I think it's a similar question to before. If it's just one show that will run for, multiple nights, then that's okay, but a season of multiple shows would not be applicable. The play should be produced in English or could be in Spanish. There's no language specification, so it can actually be in any language. I will note that not all of our panelists are fluent in multiple languages, so the application should be preferably in English, just for accessibility purposes for the review panel. You mentioned for devised work to provide a 15-minute sample. It's a 15-page sample, sorry. Does this mean the previous version of the project we are applying for, or just a previous project of ours? So for devised work, it would be up to 15 pages of the previous project that you're applying for, or it can be a list of like themes and concepts, but it should be pages, not minutes. So again, on eligibility, a workshop of the production does not disqualify the project. That's true. You can have workshops. The play just can't have been reviewed before, and it can't have had a world premiere. I have 2 artists who would like to have my nonprofit produce them. I know that one organization can only submit 1 application, but can each individual artist list my company as a co-producer? This gets into the kind of key collaborator or co-producer question, where it would be considered as multiple applications, because the money would be going to one organization from multiple projects, and we are just trying to stay fair to the diverse and robust community of theater companies and individual playwrights that we have in New York City. My project is a multi-dimensional immersive project that combines elements of dance, theater, performance, video, and improv. There isn't a specific script in the project right now. Is this eligible? Yes, this is eligible. You would want to submit something as your work sample. The work sample will be an important review component for the panel. I would, in this case, kind of reference what we've said for devised or company created pieces. You can provide some documentation and narrative about the concepts and themes. And if you do have some script in place, if that's applicable for this project, you can submit that. My work is based on traditional folklore, retold with a contemporary global perspective. I have staged 2 earlier versions and I'm planning another, but each version contains substantial revisions. Is this within the guidelines? This is kind of a tricky question. You can email us and we can kind of like look into it a little bit more. In terms of it being earlier versions, it does become a tricky question for eligibility. I'm not to say that it can't be eligible. It's reading this, I think it could be, but you would want to be very clear in your narrative that this is a essentially new project. It's not the same as the earlier versions. It may be a similar concept, but yeah, I hope that answers your question. But if not, you can feel free to email us. The project we're looking to apply for will perform in February and March of 2023. Unfortunately, that is not eligible because it's outside the timeline. Do we have to have other funding in place, especially if you're an individual artist? Not necessarily, especially since these are production grants for theater. If a playwright applies as a self-producer, can they add producing partners later? Yes. Can we receive feedback on previous unsuccessful applications? Unfortunately, no, just due to the volume of applications and just staff capacity. But if you do email us, we have some like general advice that we could share with you, but we can't go over previous applications with individuals. We are here to ask about a fusion of classical text of Medea and the opera, which has not been done. Would that be considered original? Yes, it can be. It would not be applicable if it was just an adaptation, but if it's sort of using the classical text as source material, it would be considered original. But if you would like to talk about that project more specifically, send us an email. In terms of renting a venue or theater, how does it work for securing a certificate of liability insurance for Actors Equity Association and non-equity cast actors? So this would be more of a question for the venue if that would work for you. I'm not necessarily the person to ask for this. How do you project a professional staging? Do you need to have a firm commitment from a theater to produce the play in 2024? No, you do not need to have a firm commitment. It would be nice to have an idea. Projecting a professional staging just means that you're planning to have the project be staged by 2024. So if that may be like milestones or a schedule of events, something that shows us that you will plan to produce the project in the timeline. Is there a guideline for how we should determine our request amount? So this is about the budget. Not necessarily. I think it would be up to your team, or if you're self-producing, do just like a little bit of research to see what kind of like venues you're looking at, how much they cost. The artists you're thinking of working with, maybe ask around to see what their fees are and get a sense of how much work, how much time, how much travel, that kind of thing would go into the project. If I only have a few people a part of my project now, how do I estimate the expenses or salary? You can do a Google search to see some examples of what certain artists may charge. That could give you a blueprint. Rather than fees for a costume designer or other designers, do the costumes or props count as equipment? Yes, they can. There's instances where it may not. Essentially, like if the costume or prop will be like thrown away at the end, if it's just for this show and it's not going to last after the show. But in general, I would just recommend putting the fees into a costume designer, even if that costume designer is yourself. Someone's, putting it together. Can the budget be larger than the grant offering? Yes. So if your project overall expenses are more than the grant, just put those in the expense column or in the expense table. It helps the panel see like how big the project is. Can the funds be used for the developmental workshop if you plan to have the premiere by March of 2024? Yes. What is the maximum amount I can apply for? For theater, the maximum grant amount is $50,000. So about the work samples again, for a submission where music plays a critical role, is the music sample request up to 10 minutes or should it be 10 minutes? It's up to 10 minutes. I'm working on, okay, so this is eligibility again. I'm working on recovering a lost script that has only been produced once in 1980. Having to reconstruct and rebuild the script fragments for a production at a downtown theater scheduled for March of 2023. I will just quickly note that March of 2023 is outside of the timeline. So it sounds like maybe the timeline wouldn't match up for this grant. However, if you do change the timeline, the question is, would this qualify as new work? And the answer is, it really depends on how like the script would be reconstructed. Having it been produced once already does make it ineligible. However, if you're reconstructing and rebuilding it to the point where it could be considered a new work, then you can certainly apply and just be very specific in your narrative that this is a new project, kind of based on this original source material. But that said, March of 2023 would be outside the scope of this project grant. What if I'm helping another artist with her theater project and I apply for media? Would both projects be eligible? It depends on what you mean by helping. If you're a producer or someone who's, a key collaborator, part of like the producing team, part of the directing team, part of the writing team, that would make this ineligible because it would be considered as multiple applications. We really do want to be fair to everybody in the community to give everybody a chance to apply, and having one person be on multiple projects just is a question of fairness. And it sounds like you want a script that is already written. If I'm thinking of writing something new but it's not written yet, is it not eligible? Not necessarily. So the script doesn't need to be fully written. These are production grants. That said, the panel does want to see something. So you would want to submit up to 15 pages of some excerpt in whatever form that it's in now. And it doesn't have to be the full 15 pages. And you can note in your narrative that it's in progress, but the panel will have to see something. If the focus of the play is on a male figure, but the playwright and director is female, do I qualify? Yes. Is a screenplay without film eligible? I think this is a question for the media category. If so, you can go on NYFA's YouTube channel. There's another recorded webinar for media. How does a theater or production company apply? Are all applicants individuals? A producer applying on behalf of an organization, for example. If it's a theater company, you can apply as the company. And if a producer is applying on behalf of the organization, that's also fine, so long as there's not multiple applications coming from one organization. You can use the theater company's address as the address, that's as the applicant address. How does your project represent voices, experiences, and perspectives of all who identify as women? I feel this is a difficult question to answer because all of us have different experiences. This is a great question. Essentially, the question of all who identify as women is meant to capture the diverse experiences of different identities within women. It's not actually meant to say every single woman has one experience and every single woman, this project is representing every woman. It's more to say this project represents this specific experience and you can explain that. And it's just meant to say that there are multiple ways to identify as a woman. And in that way, if you have an experience as a woman that's potentially outside of some, cisgendered kind of idea of womanhood, that's completely applicable. So some more questions on budget. If the show contains multimedia elements like projected video, can those video production element costs be included in the budget? They can be included in the project expenses. So for example, if you're buying a camera, you can put that in the project expense. You cannot put that in the NYC Women's Fund allocation if it's an equipment purchase. If it's a rental of video, then that's completely eligible for the Women's Fund allocation. I hope that answers that question. If the budget only shows items within the grant period, okay, so the budget tables, the expense table and the income table, that should be the entire project over however long the project has been around for. The NYC Women's Fund allocation is where you would want to specify how you're spending the grant. So that question is how you're spending the grant. The budget tables are the total project. Total project expense and income gives the review panel an idea of the scope of the project. The NYC allocation question, that gives the panel an idea of how you plan to spend the NYC Women's Fund grant amount. Does it need to be fully produced by the deadline? Yes. The funds can't be used for a staged reading or workshop. The funds can be used for a staged reading or workshop, but the play should still be produced within the deadline. Do props count as equipment? Most of the time, yes. For example, if you have like fake blood or something, it's not necessarily equipment. But if I were to buy, something that could be, used after, that would be unfortunately counting as equipment. So I would just, in that case, put money towards like a props person. And you don't need to hire somebody else, that can be you. The heaviest lift on this application is estimating the line item budget for a project that is not completely cast and script not fully completed. Is it better to estimate higher than adjust downward? That's up to you. Unfortunately, part of being an artist is, doing things like budgets. It's not fun, but it just gives the review panel something to reference. And again, about, is it better to estimate higher? It's, that would be up to the panel's discretion, whether or not they would see that as advantageous or not. I'm not able to answer that. Can I use funds to develop and rehearse a play that is mostly written? Yes, so long as it hasn't been produced previously. There's a question on how long the play should be. There's no like time limit. I see, again, some raised hands. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of people on this webinar, so if you could just please direct your question to the Q&A box. We're working to get through them all. Eligibility. Do all artists who are getting paid need to have work authorization in the USA? Not necessarily. Whoever is the recipient of funds should be able to provide a W-9, but not all of the artists need to necessarily have work authorization in the USA. We're not going to, collect that information. Can you elaborate on new work requirement? For example, if the play was produced in a different form in another country, is it still eligible? If the play was produced anywhere in another country or another time period, unfortunately, it would not be considered new work. These are production-based grants meant to support, the creation of a new project that has not been produced before. If it's using source material from something that's already been produced and it's kind of, putting in enough original content, then it would be eligible. But I understand that it's kind of tricky. I am an independent artist with an independently produced project and have an NYC 501c3 producer who will apply with me. Can I fill out the submittable application for him and it's submitted online for him? If this is for one project, then yes. If it's for multiple projects, then no. I think send us an email. Does a festival production, basically self-production, which sold tickets but was not reviewed, count as a world premiere? That's a tricky question. Send us an email about that. Yeah, send us an email. Okay, so what does it mean to have principal photography completed? Principal photography is the like production stage of a film. So this is not applicable to the theater category. If you are doing a theater project, you just don't have to worry about it. If you're doing a film, please reference the media category. Can the piece at a point of application still be a draft? Yes. Can this grant be used for research? Yes. Can you purchase costumes with the grant? It's just tricky when it gets into these kind of questions. It really is just more appropriate for the grant to have an artist fee instead. So for example, someone who's buying the costume, you can pay that person, but it would be just a little bit confusing for the panel to kind of decide, like, is this costume, is this specific prop considered equipment? It's a lot easier for us to just see the artist fees. Yeah, sorry to not have better news. Is there a maximum and minimum request? There's no minimum. The maximum is $50,000. Do we have to have other funding in place? Not necessarily. What if we are applying for the amount we need without other grants? That's okay. It's a production-based grant. So about work samples, can the 15-page sample be anywhere in the script or does it have to be in the beginning? It can be anywhere. Just note in the metadata, so once you upload it, there will be a box that pops up. You can say like where it is in the script. Can it consist of pages from a pitch deck to communicate themes and vision? Yes, it can, especially if it's devised. Could work samples of previous shows be applicable? No, not unless it's a devised piece. But if it's like other shows that are not like the project to be produced, then no, the work samples should be from the project. Can the 15-page work sample include existing source material that is in essay prose instead of script form? I think it would be okay. Just note why you're including essay so that the panel has something to reference. Does this work sample need to follow the guidelines of the grant? Yes. Anything part of the application should follow the guidelines. So, would take a close read of the guidelines. What if the project has been produced as a webisode and is now being adapted to a stage play? That is eligible because it's not a play. Can you apply for a previously unsuccessful project? Yes. Is a theatrical adaptation of a novel considered original work? Yes, so long as you know, that's like adaptation hasn't been done before. Does the producing theater have to be in New York City? Yes. The NYC Women's Fund is meant to support New York City based, not necessarily theater companies, but just shows. So the applicant should have a New York City based address, and the actual performances and rehearsals need to be in New York City. Can the project be staged in the Bronx? Yes, the Bronx is in New York City. Does professional mean a certain equity contract? No, not necessarily. So you don't need to have like specific actors equity contracts or anything like that in place. If you do though, that's also fine. Can I hire a co-producer who is based out of another country to fly to New York for this project? Yes, so long as the applicant is New York City based. I understand about the premiere aspect, but I'm not sure what a workshop means. A presentation of a new play is planned for a New York City theater in January 2023. Quick interjection. January 2023 would be before, that would be during the review period of this grant. And so if it is going to be presented in January 2023, unfortunately, it's not part of the grant timeline. The grant timeline would be March of 2023 when the application, when the applicants are notified, to March 2024, where the deadline for the project is. There will be a charge for tickets, but it won't be reviewed. There will be substantial revisions for the next presentation. Oh, I understand the question. Please send us an email about this one because you know, it does get tricky about whether that's a workshop or not, if you're charging for tickets. Is a fiscally sponsored theater company eligible to apply? Yes. What is the definition of a world premiere? The definition of a world premiere is essentially that the project has not been produced previously and it's having its first staging in, you know, in the world. And for us, it would be for New York City. I hope that kind of answers that question. If you've had workshops, again, or developmental readings where there hasn't been reviews, that's applicable. What does get tricky is whether you've charged for tickets. That's something that we would have to kind of discuss project by project. So send us an email. About the budget, are administrative fees qualified for the expenses? Yes. Do you have to have a 501c3 or be fiscally sponsored? No, not necessarily. Still unclear. Must the show be slated for a full production by March of 2024 to be eligible? Yes. If there was a play reading in 2019 of a short version of the play project and then workshopped once in 2021, is it eligible? Yes. But from what I can tell, there was a reading, like a developmental reading of a short version and then workshopped. That's okay. For a script sample, do you prefer a continuous excerpt or are separate scenes okay? That's up to the panel, like for them to decide in a way. But if you do include separate scenes, I would just be very clear in your either your narrative or when you upload the metadata section. That's like the box that pops up once you've uploaded the application. That way the panel just can understand what they're reading. My production is split into two productions, a musical review and a follow-up dramatic play. If it is 2 separate projects, then it would maybe pick one. If it's like 2 components of one project, that's fine. Can the project tour around the country but start in New York City? Yes. Can I, although you would want to stage 5 nights in New York City as part of the guidelines. Can I apply for both film and theater categories for the same projects? No, that would be considered multiple applications, unfortunately, and we want to remain fair to the community of artists that are interested in this grant. So no, if you do submit multiple projects, multiple applications, even if they're different projects, we will ask you to kindly withdraw one, and that's just to respect the guidelines that are in place. Can I apply for both? Oh, sorry. If the project is set to be produced by September of 2023, is it still allowed? Yes, September of 2023 is within the timeline. Can we charge for tickets if we get the grant? Yes, there is a public access component, which just says that the play should be available to the residents of New York City in some way for free in some form, but it's completely applicable to charge for tickets. Can the musical work sample be of 2 YouTube links to 2 5-minute developmental music videos of the project? Would a 5-minute trailer and a 5-minute song be okay? I would potentially recommend combining those into one. I will say that the panel is not instructed to watch the video. It's up to them if they would want to watch it or not. They're just instructed to listen to the music sample. So if you would want to make it a MP3, that would be a little bit more appropriate just because the panel has a lot of submissions to get through. Explain in detail what you mean by a show must be slated for March 2024 premiere. Do you mean you need to have booked a venue ahead of time? So in order to stage the show by March 2024, if you get the grant in March of 2023, that's when production as part of the grant would start. So at that point, you can begin working on the script, casting, finding a venue. By March of 2024, you will have wanted to book a venue and stage the show, meaning rehearsals, staging, and final reporting should be done by March of 2024. Do virtual performances count towards the 5 performances, or do all performances need to be a physical location? Virtual performances do count, and that's something we implemented since the pandemic. Can I put a budget in for touring? You can for the expense table, definitely. For the NYC Women's Fund, it would be up to the panel if they would want to support that necessarily, but it's not, it wouldn't make it ineligible. Do we have to charge money for admission, or can we be open to the public with suggested donation? Yes, you can be, you can charge or you cannot charge. Is there a budget line for the venue? There should be, and if there isn't, you can say other and say that that's for the venue. And so the email that you can send the individual questions to is NYC Women's Fund at NYFA.org. So if you're looking at the screen right now, NYCWOMENSFUND at NYFA.org. So thank you everyone for your questions. That was a really great session. I'm really happy to have all the interest and the specific projects. We're happy to answer your questions via email. Do give us, a couple of, a little bit of patience as we're getting through. We have a lot of questions to get through the email as well. But thank you everyone for attending tonight's session. And yeah, good luck with your application. Please visit the website. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, everyone.